This is Myra Elaine on the Buying Space channel. Today I'm reading from the Torah. On this side is the Hebrew, and on this side is the English translated directly from the Hebrew. And the Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament for those of you that aren't familiar. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And we are in Leviticus chapter 13, and which is highly interesting, but I will warn you up front, it is not something to listen to or to read if you're eating or if you have children in the room. All of my Bible studies and readings are adult Bible studies and shouldn't be listened to with children in the room. So here we go in chapter 13 of Leviticus. And the Lord spoke unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, If a man shall have in his skin of his flesh a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, it might become in the skin of his flesh the plague, or leprosy. Then shall he be brought to Aaron the priest, or unto one of his sons the priests. And if the priest shall see the plague on his skin of his flesh, and the hair in the plague shall be turned white, and the appearance of the plague be deeper than his skin of his flesh, it is the plague of leprosy. And so soon as the priest shall see him, he shall pronounce him unclean. But if it be white bright spot on the skin of his flesh, and its appearance be not deeper than the skin, and the hair not turned white, then shall the priest shut up the plague for 7 days. And the priest shall see him on the 7th day, and behold, if the plague have remained unchanged in its appearance, the plague has not spread in the skin, then shall the priest shut him up 7 days more. And the priest shall see him again in 7 days, and behold, if the plague is somewhat pale, and the plague has not spread in his skin, then shall the priest pronounce him clean. It is a scab, and shall be washed. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. My goodness. They could have used this in Europe during the Black Plague, right? If they would have just followed the instructions in the Bible that the Christians claim to believe. Of course, part of the problem then was that only the priests could read the Bible. A lot of common people couldn't read at all. But even compared to modern medicine, now you've got to remember these people are living in temporary shelters. They have a tabernacle, which is a very nice tabernacle, but it is portable, and they're traveling across the desert. They don't have medical labs. They don't have microscopes. This was very uncommon knowledge. And how to quarantine someone for 7 days and then another 7 days to determine whether the person's clean or unclean. Now, these rules about being clean and unclean could be very harsh on the individual in question, because they would have to live outside of society. They couldn't bring sacrifices in to the tabernacle and later the temple. They couldn't be around other people. they had to, I guess if there were enough people with the plague or with leprosy, they could, have their own community. But none of them would still be able to function within the camp or the town if, later on, if they lived in a town. But these rules of quarantine and cleaning that we've seen in the last couple of chapters here in Leviticus are right with modern medicine. And they didn't know what viruses and bacteria and fungus and all of that were. They were just following the instructions of God, and God was protecting his people. And, I've heard people say about this chapter that, they knew this. I don't know. Maybe they came to realize a lot. In further verses, it talks about whether someone has white hair or black hair, on their skin where they're having problems. And also, how do they determine if it's not just acne or a rash? So these priests, down through the generations, I'm sure they became expert. Now, when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans, this practice stopped because a lot of the laws concerning clean and unclean were connected to whether you could make sacrifices or not, or whether you could go to the temple or not. Certainly, these people were still isolated if they had leprosy, and everyone knew that had read the scriptures or went to temple or tabernacle, outside, and heard what was being said and what was being done. And as people came and went, their family members, maybe, or people in their tribe or their community, went back and forth and were declared clean and unclean. Certainly that family and that tribe would learn, what the priests were saying and doing, and it became known. And this is interesting because this will teach us, like, I had a relative that had chronic acne the last 10 years of his life. I mean, his face was just a minefield, but they would have known the difference. But modern rabbis do not do this. They still observe, there might be some very Orthodox Jews that still do this kind of thing. I think it'd be a rarity. But, they do things like when a woman's on her menstrual cycle, she's considered unclean. And modern Jews still, for the most part, that practice Judaism, don't have relations during that time. So it's a lot of this doesn't apply. But spiritually, when we look at whether someone's clean or unclean, we need to look at parallels to whether someone's a sinner or not. In my personal life, if I have someone that's doing something wrong, sometimes what I'll do is I'll distance myself. I do that on social media. I got an option on Facebook. If I don't like what somebody's posting, I don't want to end the friendship, so I'll snooze that person for, I think the option is only 30 days. I wish I had a weekly option, because people go through phases. They get triggered by certain things, and you just don't want to be around them when they're triggered by whatever it is, or whatever's going on. You feel a little differently than they do about what's going on, and you just don't want to look at, what they're saying right now. But you don't want to lose the relationship, so you don't post or you don't reply, and then you go back and see if that person has calmed down or that issue is over with. It's not being emphasized so much because they've moved on to something else that maybe you agree with. But in our relationship with God, we go through phases where we're tempted by different things from our past, or we're having a problem, uh, in our walk with God, or we're having a problem praying, and we need a recovery time for that. I mean, we shouldn't, but sometimes we do. Sometimes people have things happen and they're like, why, God, why? And they doubt God for a moment. And, that's not uncommon. It takes faith to believe in God. And we are under a lot of societal pressures not to believe, or, people say, oh, that Noah's Ark thing, that's ridiculous. It takes faith to believe in God and believe the Bible these days. And then you got Christians doing things that are contradictory to what Jesus said. You got all these wars that involve these groups that, have very strongly held beliefs in the other, and in Christianity and in other Abrahamic religions. And some days you think, wow, the world would be better off if none of this ever happened. But it's real. So it had to happen. It has to play out like it's going to play out. We just need to have faith and relax and trust God and walk in faith. But know that our God, 3,000 years before, well, I can't say 3,000. Yeah, because I think I can say 3,000 years safely. Before, we knew about modern medicine, about bacteria and viruses and fungus. God gave his people instructions on what to do to protect his people, to keep his people healthy. Like in the last chapter, we talked about women after they've had babies, that they're considered unclean, but they were quarantined. Here we are seeing modern quarantine procedures. I mean, it's not written like a modern quarantine procedures, but it's basically what the priests were doing by declaring someone unclean to look and re-examine, because putting someone outside the camp, outside of society, was harsh. But young mothers would stay isolated for a certain period of time. It varied whether it was a girl baby or a boy baby, but they would isolate them, which was perfect for the mother who's now weak from childbirth, who's susceptible to disease, and also the baby. And time to bond with mother and have that nurturing go on. I mean, that's what we all should be doing today. And don't, unwisely, don't follow these rules. And I'm not saying you're going to hell. We're saved by grace. But I'm saying this is just chock full of wisdom, and recognizing what is going on with disease is important. I mean, when we went through the pestilence in 2020, those several years that, there was isolation, and, then we might face that in the future too. We kind of knew what the symptoms were of that pestilence. And this could teach you, I don't know if people with leprosy don't, walk around in New York City. So you could recognize, what's going on with people's sores. Is that acne? How do you know what if somebody has a skin rash, or whether they have something contagious or not? I mean, I haven't done a deep dive in studying, what leprosy looks like, but because I don't think I've ever seen anybody with leprosy in my life, but there are still people with leprosy. And, I as a person, for my personal safety, should maybe recognize it. Of course, I'm not going to have, meet a person and then 7 days later re-examine, and then 7 days re-examine what's going on with their wounds or um, skin, but it would be good knowledge to know the differences just from a point of personal protection. And God was protecting his people from not having a plague or having a disease, that is spreadable, that would spread to everyone and make everyone sick. And, God protects us. We just need to follow. I mean, just like these people, they're probably like, what the heck? The guy has a rash and you're making him live outside the camp. They didn't have the faith to believe that God was taking care of them, because that guy has a rash. He has this very specific rash that's contagious, that shortens people's lives. So you don't want that rash. You don't want it at all. So you need to stay away from him. And, it's, one of those things. It's, God provides us with the information we need. I mean, I'm just amazed since I've come back to Christianity that I can go to the Bible and find the answers I'm looking for. And it's just a wonderful book, and it's complicated, and it's simple at the same time. But anyway, forgive me as I enjoy Leviticus. And see, I went to, I'll rewind and figure out what verse I ended on. But there's Leviticus 13. I want to read slowly, even though it's gross. I mean, I don't think I'll end up reading it during Halloween. But 14 goes on to talk about leprosy and wounds and boils and, that sort of thing. So some of you might enjoy this phase of Leviticus. So, but I want to at least read it and understand it while I'm reading it. So that way, maybe in the future, it'll help me out. It'll help me by knowing, if I end up in a shelter or something in the future, I'll know, okay, that person has a skin problem. What did Leviticus say? Was it a bright spot? And was the hair black or is it growing out white? And how did they know when they had somebody with gray hair or salt and pepper hair that hair wasn't related to just their age? I mean, just all kinds of questions I have about this. I don't know if I need to find a website of a Jewish dermatologist, because, later on, different people, not just Aaron and his sons, but different priests, different Levites had different jobs. Like there was a family, a surname, that did the incense and the oils. So I'm sure that as time went on and they were in the temple, there were priests that were more like physicians, or they were experts in declaring people clean and unclean. That there was maybe a group or a family that did that. So, all this is fascinating to me, and I hope that you get excited about studying Leviticus and the spiritual implications of it too. You all have a wonderful and blessed day.